before COVID, we were in the process of working around our workforce development stream of the LDP project. And we're working on the training resource around targeting parents and carers around supporting them as a family to encourage their child to be active. So we're working with our partner, Lusu Sports, who've created a inclusive kit bag with various different pieces of equipment which would have been tried and tested and that we'd worked with before. And so we had to change all of our face-to-face training that we were due to do, and we then did it all virtually and got kit bags out to parents and carers at the beginning of lockdown, and did a 3-phase test and learn sort of process, where in phase 1 we got kit bags out in March, and then going on to sort of phase 3 that we're just coming to the end of now, of a 3-month review with parents and carers. And we've changed our methodology throughout all of that process. So we really listened to parents and carers, what was working for them, what they liked about the activity bags, what worked better for them. And we did a lot of things via Facebook and Zoom and closed Facebook groups, and engaged with them in different ways. And we feel like we've come up with quite a good process now and product towards the end of our phase 3 that we could potentially replicate in other areas. But it was quite a personal process with a lot of these families. We worked with small groups of families, and we were able to really capture what they wanted to achieve and what goals they wanted to achieve. And we did sort of some Zooms in the room, which we call coaches in the room sessions with them. And we had some really positive feedback towards the end of the whole process around that. Parents and carers became active with their children, were able to support them, and it led up to some really positive feedback from all of them.
That's great, thanks Gemma. And I guess it might be useful just to say how you got to the starting point in terms of having this product and being ready to develop that with the families and discuss that sort of feedback loop, that in terms of the learning and adapting and getting this product kit right for the families.
Yeah, so we already had quite a good relationship with Lucy and were confident in the product, but we outlined to parents and carers from the beginning what was expected of them, and how this could benefit them. And we also had to build up that relationship with a lot of parents to say, what you're going to give us in feedback will really help, especially in phase 1 and 2, to get this project right and to get the onboarding process right for the future. So we really gave them a lot of sort of support in order to do that, and there was a lot of communication, there was lots of phone calls, but I think what a lot of parents did like was the fact that their feedback was valued, and that it was being able to use further on in the process, and that other parents and other families could benefit from the feedback that they gave. So that was really vital.
Yeah, to add to that, it was very much the listening and learning approach. So asking them, so what's happening for you? What are you learning about your child and what they can do that you didn't see before? What can you see as some of the benefits of doing it in this way? But, essentially it was, if you are a senior coach going into an organisation training other coaches, it was trying to strike that balance of conversation, relationship with parents, because you had to tread that careful line to not train parents to parent better in being active with their children. It was to try and teach a methodology of it is possible. We'll do it with you. We'll walk along the journey with you. We know it's hard and it's tough. And one of the families said, I have many hats on as a parent. I'm a mum, I'm an educator, I'm a nurse. I work night shifts with my children. So to put on that hat of being active with my children is something that's often the last thing as a priority. And people sometimes didn't know how to do that.
We've got some early indications that there's been some real successes at a family level, hasn't there? And I think it's important for us to now maybe understand how we're going to understand success for the whole project. And then once we know that, what is it that we think is about the project that's worked so well, so that obviously you can take that through to you to replicate elsewhere and influence other areas of work?
I think if we look at what COVID did initially was to push people within the four walls of their property and of their house. You know, this was my world. It shrunk very quickly. So whereas the support might have been for the child, or the activity centres being open for them to access activity, however they chose to be physically active, it all shifted. So I think what this is, it comes back down to the fundamental element, which is how, you know, what's my understanding of being active as a part of a social norm? You know, what's my morals and my values around being active and leading that with my children? You know, how many people have those conversations between one another as it being of vital importance? It might just come up within SEND if they've got a physio or an OT assessment or an education healthcare plan, which points out towards the health element of the part of the plan. But, you know, again, where's the parents' role within this across society to encourage and stimulate and sustain activity in meaningful ways? And we felt very much with this methodology, you know, we have parents with children with different impairments or different disabilities. So they were very much trying to work out what their child's mode is when it comes to activity, because often they go to a cycling centre or school sports or to an after school club, and they might not see what a child does within that setting to be active or how they do it. So when you bring the parent within the confines of their own home, whether it's in the lounge, using equipment, or in the garden, they're learning new skills there about communication, about support, about perseverance, about making things fun, the concepts of what the benefits are of being active together. And this was on top of the time and during COVID when people were quite exhausted, particularly as time went by, because a lot of their formal routes of support were taken away. So I kind of feel like the methodology of this, working with the family, starts from that foundation level. You know, what and how do I feel about activity for my child, and how do I facilitate that in our world within knowing what my child can do or can't do, and bringing a community of sport around them that are of a like-minded nature.
Extend the question really in a way. I mean, there's been so much interest in this bit of work because, you know, it is fascinating. I suppose the interest that I've got is it feels quite intense. It feels kind of, you know, very solid because of the various phases and stages that have been gone through. And I suppose a lot of people, not even in GM, but further afield, will be interested in the replicableness of this work, the sustainability of this kind of approach. And I wondered whether, Steve and Gemma, you had any kind of thoughts on, is this very particular to a particular target audience, or is there elements of this that we can lift and really kind of spread more widely, both at a borough level or even beyond Stockport GM levels? What do you think the key learnings that others can take?
Yeah, so I think there's a few other disciplines around engaging families, working with families, and around community development principles around families, because it's partly education, isn't it? But it's partly role modelling, and it's partly coming alongside. So some of the principles in what this is, I think, is universal. And it comes down, we were speaking in an earlier workshop about a time intensity model to support the process of behaviour change. So, you know, if you break down this element of what we did, you know, you've got an activity bag and a methodology of engagement. You could change all of those settings, but like I said, it comes down to the experience and the knowledge that people have, particularly within SEND, that when you're speaking to a family who've got a child with disability, they immediately know that you understand them and you're working with them. So that's the specific things around this being replicable. But, you know, if you look at population health around families that are obese or families that are inactive, I think that this is incredibly replicable, because you're starting from the starting point of, hello, how are you? Should we go on a journey? And it's not assuming they have all the answers or the resources, but we bring a little bit of that to them. And in the conversation and the support, you realise what assets they've got within themselves, within the home, and within the wider family unit to incorporate that. And we also shared earlier, there was one family in phase 3 who was just not ready to come on this journey, and they openly admitted where they were struggling with their child because of various different settings related to where they lived in their environment, and just how they felt as a parent, just absolutely exhausted, that they would prefer to access an activity centre to be active with their child. They wasn't prepared to go on this programme individually. So again, it comes down to who wants to change, how they want to change, and support in that process. That's what I think about this being replicable.
To shift the conversation on now to a little bit around the strategic importance of being physically active around Stockport, and how, you know, there's a lot of talk around the new plans and, you know, the recovery, and hopefully we've got Russ here. He's just going to talk to that for a few minutes.
Kath, yeah, I think the main thing to say is that for me, the strategic role is all around. It's around facilitation. It's creating a framework and a space for the work to happen. Now, we're fortunate in Greater Manchester because that space and that framework has been created for us through GM Moving. So what we want to do in Stockport is take that space that has been created and is continued to be created, and make that applicable to Stockport. And then the strategic part about it is to work within the framework, and then allow my role is to allow facilitation, because the great people that are doing the work are generating the ideas, are generating the innovation, and it's the strategic role to make sure that the space is maintained for them to be able to do that, but B, that the impact of what they're doing is recognised across the wider strategic aims of Stockport. So how, of course, we do that. The local pilot forms part of our active community strategy, as a lot of you know. So the space for the local pilot to work is within that framework in Stockport, and the successful positioning of active communities further allows the local pilot to develop the work that it's doing. Because it's starting to be seen to have impact, not just through the local pilot work, but the work we've been doing over the last few years, to actually sell it in terms of positioning it in strategic work at the moment isn't that difficult. And actually, as terrible as it all is, COVID has actually helped that, because there's that consciousness now. I said in one of the workshops, there's a much greater consciousness of the importance of being healthy, being fit around the COVID. But that's just an example. We all know the wider context of physical activity, but in the public consciousness, it's really front and centre now because of COVID. So to position it into, and the work's ongoing around this, and all at different stages, but the positioning of the active communities, and therefore local pilot, in the council plan development, in the borough plan development, in the work around regen and transformation, and all the mayoral development corporation work for the walking and cycling particularly, in leisure procurement, in the health and well-being strategy development, in the public health business plan. I don't have to do much selling, because the understanding is already there around the role it can have. Once the understanding about the importance of physical activity is there, what you need to do then is use something that I heard years and years ago in a workshop I attended, the old WIFM. So people always think, what's in it for me? How does physical activity impact and support the work I'm going to do? I understand it's good for you, but what's it going to contribute to my work as a planner? What's it going to contribute to my work as an educationalist? What's it going to contribute to my work as a construction worker or construction industry? And that's what you've got to be thinking all the time. People most people understand that being physically active is good for you, but you've then got to sell it to them in their context, in that what's in it for me, because that's what they're thinking all the time. What's in it for me? And if you talk to them in those kind of terms, you've got a better chance of engagement. And obviously, once you've got the engagement, you can then take that relationship further.
That's great, thanks Russ. And I guess with the health and wellbeing being one of the key sort of priority areas in recovery, it's like you say, it's an easy sell for a lot of the conversations that you're having at the moment. Can you just sort of describe to us the relationship with the One Stockport and the recovery, and how the local pilot has managed to influence that agenda, or do you not need to?
Yes, thanks, Kath. I forgot to mention that, didn't I? So in terms of Stockport, the Stockport Borough Plan, in terms of COVID recovery across the board, economic recovery and so on, town centre recovery, as well as the health recovery, is called One Stockport. And straight away, obviously, because it's a result of a health epidemic and pandemic, for health and well-being was one of the key themes around One Stockport, the recovery from the situation we're all in, and therefore, because physical activity was already positioned within health and well-being and public health, because that health and well-being strand was identified as critical to the recovery work in Stockport, therefore automatically people's thoughts turn to physical activity and the role that physical activity can play in that health and well-being element. We all know that it's going to play a significant role, or can play a significant role, in economic development and other areas as well. But the initial thoughts at senior level were around that health and well-being element. And we also knew that in terms of our physical activity recovery work, the Stockport Moving Together, which I've talked about at a previous workshop, we also knew that we had assets out there. We had people on furlough, and we also had people who weren't on furlough, who were funded by programs like this, actually by the local pilot, so they weren't furloughed, but actually weren't able to do what was originally in the planning. So how can we take all those assets and all those skills and all that understanding and all that innovation and apply it and redirect it slightly in terms of recovery from COVID? So that's what we did. We just took what we had, the assets, the understanding, the innovation, plus a little bit of the funding. Although, to be honest, very little of the local pilot funding has gone into the Stockport Moving Together work, because we've been able to bring other partners such as the NHSF Foundation Trust and the CCG, Stockport Homes, and other partners on board who can also bring their resources as well and their assets to it. And it's just about realigning. So in terms of the Stockport Moving Together work and its links to local pilot, well, never more has long-term conditions been relevant, and never more has worklessness been relevant around the impact of COVID. So that just gives you an example of two elements of the local pilot we've been able to realign in line with some of the Stockport Moving Together work.
And we've spoken before about how this has been quite a long journey from Stockport's perspective, started 5 years ago. I'm just wondering if there's any words of advice you can give to localities who might be at the beginning of that journey, where other people might have different priorities or different ways of approaching things, as to how you can start to stimulate such a coherent and comprehensive approach.
I think probably the easiest thing I could say was start with the easy wins. Start with those people, those individuals, those services, those areas who want to engage with you. Because if you start engaging and showing impact from that engagement, other people soon start asking you questions. What I wouldn't do is try and do too much too soon, but also spend too much time banging your head against a brick wall. Start with the easy stuff. Show impact from that, and then build it from there.
Yeah, and finally, when you talk about impact there, do you mean impact in terms of, end game activity levels going up, or do you mean impact in terms of new innovations or different ways of doing things, or engagement with communities, for example?
it's anything really, including the qualitative stuff. Just people saying how much it's made a difference to them is enough. Whether active lives goes up or not in next year is less relevant, if in the early stages particularly. But it's all of it. There isn't one bit of impact evidence I would focus on. I'd use whatever becomes available, and don't forget the qualitative stuff because it's really important.